When I married Ashley, or Ash, as she preferred to be called, I honestly thought I had found the one. I mean, I had no clue that what seemed like the perfect marriage was going to turn into a nightmare. My name's Ryan Walker. Like I said, my wife's name was Ash. I thought we'd be that couple who grows old together, sits on the porch in rocking chairs, and watches the grandkids run around the yard. It all seemed so simple, so right? 2 years after we got married, I started my own consulting business. It was something I dreamed of doing for a while, and Ash was really supportive in the beginning. She was working at a small company that sold medical supplies, and we both had a plan. We were going to save up, get settled, and then start a family once everything was in place. You know, the responsible thing to do. That's what we told ourselves, anyway. We bought this small cottage down a quiet street. I remember the moment we saw it for the first time. Ash's eyes lit up like she had just found her dream home. It was a bit run down on the inside, needed a lot of work, but structurally it was solid. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. Our nearest neighbors were 200 yards away, and there were only 6 houses on the entire street. It was perfect for the peaceful life we thought we wanted. The renovation took almost a year. Ash and I did most of the work ourselves, which was exhausting but kind of fun too. We bonded over fixing things up, spending weekends covered in paint or plaster. I had to bring in some professionals for the plumbing and electrical work. Some things were beyond my skill set, but by the end of it, the house was everything we wanted. Once it was done, I felt like I could finally breathe. Ash and I would spend hours talking about how amazing it would be when we eventually had kids running through the halls, filling the house with laughter. That was the dream, anyway. But like they say, nothing stays perfect forever. Things started to change just before our 9th anniversary. I remember the shift like it happened yesterday. Ash became distant, almost cold. At first, I thought it was stress from work. I'd ask her if everything was okay, and she'd just brush me off, saying she was tired or that I was overthinking things. Our sex life, which had been great for years, all but disappeared. I can count on one hand how many times we were intimate in that last year before things fell apart. It felt like I was living with a stranger. Then, out of nowhere, she started going out more, dinner with coworkers, drinks after work. She was out 2 or 3 nights a week, and she never got home before midnight. I'd stay up waiting, wondering what was going on. I convinced myself that she just needed space, that it was normal for relationships to go through rough patches. After all, I trusted her. But the doubts started creeping in. Late at night, I'd lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that she would never cheat. Ash wouldn't do that to me, right? But every time I thought about it, the sinking feeling in my gut got worse. It got to the point where I couldn't hold it in anymore, so I reached out to an old friend for advice. His name's Dan Mitchell, and we've been close since our high school days. We met freshman year, and since then, we've been like brothers. I even hired Dan as the executive director when my business started growing because he was one of the few people I trusted completely. When I told Dan about the way Ash was acting, he didn't believe it at first. He knew her, had seen us together over the years, and he always thought we were the perfect couple. But after I laid everything out, the late nights, the cold distance, the way she barely spoke to me anymore, Dan's face changed. He went from disbelief to something more serious. Ryan, man, I hate to say this, Dan told me, rubbing his jaw like he was about to drop a bomb. But it sounds like all the signs are there. I wouldn't be surprised if she's seeing someone else. I remember sitting there, trying to process what he was saying. It was like hearing something I knew deep down but didn't want to admit. I asked him what I should do, and he said something that stuck with me. If you really want to know, hire someone. I know it's tough, but you need proof, or you'll drive yourself crazy wondering. That's when it became real for me. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was something I needed to confirm. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through everything Dan said, wondering if I had missed the signs earlier. The next day, I started looking into hiring a private investigator. I found someone online who had great reviews, a guy named Mark Reynolds. He specialized in cases like mine, so I set up a meeting. Mark was professional, straight to the point. I explained everything. Ash's sudden coldness, her late nights, and how distant she had become. He nodded, listening carefully. When I finished, he looked me in the eye and said, If she's cheating, we'll get you the evidence you need. I didn't know if I felt relieved or even more anxious. Part of me was still holding on to the hope that I was wrong, that maybe it was just a rough patch. But another part of me knew that things were about to change. Mark had a tech guy come to the house the next day. They installed small hidden cameras in a few rooms, nothing too obvious but enough to cover the important areas. The tech guy also set up some software on my phone that could monitor her messages and calls, encrypted data. I wasn't proud of spying on my wife, but I had to know the truth. A week passed before Mark called me. I remember his voice on the phone, calm but with an edge. "Ryan, I've got the information you're looking for. Everything's been saved to a secure flash drive. I can send it over now, but I'll warn you, it's not easy to see." I sat in my office, staring at my phone for a few moments. "Send it," I finally said, my voice cracking a little. Minutes later, I received the file via email. My hands were shaking as I downloaded it to my laptop and opened the folder. The footage started playing. Ash came home one afternoon, but she wasn't alone. Some guy from her office was with her. They didn't waste any time. As soon as they got inside, they were all over each other, heading straight for our bedroom. I felt sick. My stomach churned as I watched. But what hurt more than seeing her cheat was hearing her words. "I can't wait to see you again. You and the others. It's just perfect," she said. That shattered me. I had no idea there were others. Was this who she had become? I turned off the footage, unable to watch anymore. But it was enough. The truth hit me like a freight train, and there was no denying it anymore. Ash was cheating, and not just with one guy. It sounded like there were multiple. I sat there, staring blankly at the screen, trying to process everything. Anger bubbled up inside me. The betrayal cut deep, but now that I knew the truth, I had to do something. For the next few days, I couldn't get the images of Ashley and that guy out of my head. It was like they were branded onto the inside of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, there they were. I saw her laughing. I heard her voice in my head, her words echoing over and over. It was like I was stuck in a loop of torment, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. I wanted to confront her. There was a part of me that wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had destroyed everything we had built together. How could she? After everything we had been through. After all those years of trust and promises. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wouldn't matter. What good would screaming in her face do? She wouldn't care. She would just walk away, take half of everything I owned, and keep living her life without a second thought. And that's what made me angrier. The idea that she could just move on like nothing happened while I was left to pick up the pieces. It wasn't fair. I couldn't let her get away with it. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I could do. Divorce wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved. She didn't deserve to just walk away with half of my money, half of the life I had worked so hard to build. I wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused me. But how? I started searching for answers online. At first, it was just innocent curiosity. I looked up ways to expose cheaters, ways to publicly humiliate them. Maybe I could destroy her reputation, make sure everyone knew the kind of person she really was. But it wasn't enough. The more I thought about it, the less satisfying it seemed. Ruining her reputation wouldn't hurt her the way I needed her to hurt. That's when my thoughts began to spiral into darker territory. I found myself thinking about things I never thought I would consider. Things that made my skin crawl at first. But the more I dwelled on it, the more I became consumed by the idea. Ashley had taken everything from me. Maybe it was time I took something from her. The anger inside me didn't go away. It only grew. It was like a storm brewing inside, and I had no way to release it. The idea of confronting Ashley, yelling at her, or humiliating her seemed so small, so insignificant compared to the rage I felt. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible. She had taken everything I loved and torn it apart. How could someone you love do something like that? The question haunted me every day, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that confronting her wasn't enough. I started spending hours online, reading stories about revenge. It started small, forums where people talked about how they exposed cheaters or ruined their lives in petty ways. At first, it felt like a good outlet, but as I read more, I found myself drawn to the darker corners of the internet. Places where people didn't just talk about ruining reputations. They talked about making people disappear. It terrified me. But at the same time, I couldn't look away. I found threads where people offered services. They didn't say it outright, but it was clear what they were talking about. They were offering solutions to problems, ways to make someone disappear for good. I never thought I would go that far, but the more I read, the more obsessed I became. It made sense in a twisted way. Ashley had destroyed everything that mattered to me, so why shouldn't she pay the ultimate price? Divorce would only give her what she wanted: freedom, money, a fresh start. I wanted her to feel pain. I wanted her to suffer. One night, when I couldn't sleep, I came across a post from someone who called themselves the mechanic. The way they wrote, it was clear they had experience. They didn't spell it out, but it was obvious they were offering a service that would take care of people permanently. At first, I hesitated. This wasn't a movie or some crime novel. This was real life, and what I was considering was serious. But the anger had taken over. I couldn't think straight anymore. The thought of Ashley getting away with everything, laughing with her friends about how she ruined me, was too much to bear. I needed to act. So, I sent a message to the mechanic. I kept it vague at first, asking if they had experience dealing with unfaithful spouses. The response came quickly, almost too quickly. They said they could help, but they needed more information. They were cold and professional, giving me clear instructions on how we would communicate and how the payment would work. It felt surreal, but at the same time, it felt like the only option I had left. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I just wanted it to be over. After a few back-and-forth messages, the mechanic sent me a program to install on my computer. It was some kind of encrypted messaging service, something that would make sure our conversation stayed private. I downloaded it, feeling a pit in my stomach the whole time, but I couldn't stop now. I was in too deep. We continued to communicate through the encrypted program. The mechanic asked for more details about Ashley, where she worked, what her schedule was like, and most importantly, if there was a time when she would be alone. I had to think about that for a while. Ash wasn't exactly a predictable person anymore. She was always out with friends, coworkers, or, more likely, other men. But there were times when I knew she would be at the house alone. Usually, it was in the early afternoon, right before she would leave for one of her so-called meetings. I gave the mechanic the information they needed. It felt like I was handing over a part of my soul with every message I sent, but at the same time, I felt this strange sense of control. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking my life back. This was not something Ash could wiggle out of. She would pay for what she had done. Then came the hard part: payment. The mechanic didn't accept cash or credit cards. Everything had to be done through cryptocurrency. I had never used Bitcoin or anything like that before, but the mechanic walked me through it. They explained how to buy cryptocurrency, how to send it anonymously, and how to cover my tracks. It was all so cold, so calculated. It felt like I was working with a machine, not a person. After a few days of planning and preparing, the payment was sent. There was no going back now. I had crossed the line. Once the deal was in place, all I could do was wait. The mechanic told me they would handle everything, and that I didn't need to worry. They said it would look like an accident, something that wouldn't raise any suspicion. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. All I cared about was the result. The waiting was the worst part. Every day, I woke up wondering if today would be the day. Would Ash come home? Would I get a call from the police saying there had been an accident? My nerves were shot. I could barely eat or sleep. Part of me wanted it to be over, but another part of me was terrified of what I had done. I still went to work, still tried to act normal, but it was hard to keep up the facade. Dan noticed something was off. He pulled me aside one day and asked if everything was okay. "You've been acting weird lately, man. Is it still about Ash? Did you find anything out?" I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to unload all the guilt, the fear, and the anger that had been building up inside me. But I couldn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Yeah, it's still about her. I'm working through it." Dan didn't push me, but I could tell he was worried. He knew me better than anyone, and I hated that I had to lie to him. But I was in too deep now. There was no turning back. Days turned into weeks, and still nothing happened. I started to wonder if the mechanic had taken my money and run. I even thought about messaging them to ask what was going on, but I was too scared of drawing attention to myself. What if they changed their mind? What if they decided to cut ties and leave me hanging? But then, one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, staring blankly at my computer screen when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My heart pounded in my chest as I answered. "Mr. Walker?" a voice on the other end said. It was calm, professional, too calm for what they were about to tell me. "Yes, this is Ryan Walker," I replied, my voice shaking. "This is Detective Lewis with the County Police Department. I'm afraid I have some bad news. There has been an incident at your residence. It appears that there was a fire. We are still investigating the cause, but your wife was inside the house at the time." My mind went blank. I couldn't process what he was saying. "Ashley, she didn't make it," the detective continued. "I'm very sorry for your loss." I felt the air leave my lungs. Even though I had planned this, even though I knew it was coming, hearing the words out loud made it real. Ashley was dead. The fire, the mechanic had promised, had happened. I had gotten exactly what I wanted, but it didn't feel the way I thought it would. "Can you come down to the police station?" the detective asked. "We have some questions for you." "Of course," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be there as soon as I can." I hung up the phone and sat there in silence. My hands were trembling, and I felt sick to my stomach. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the revenge I had planned for so long. But now that it was real, now that Ashley was really gone, I wasn't sure how to feel. The detective didn't seem suspicious. In fact, he seemed almost sympathetic. He told me they were still investigating the cause of the fire, but that it appeared to have started in the kitchen. They believed it was most likely an electrical issue, or perhaps a malfunction with one of the appliances. I nodded along, doing my best to look devastated while inside I was battling a storm of emotions. Relief, fear, guilt. It was all swirling inside me. "Mr. Walker," the detective said, his voice softer now, "I understand this must be a terrible shock for you. If there's anything you need, do not hesitate to reach out. We will keep you informed as the investigation progresses." I thanked him, doing my best to hold back any sign of the real emotions boiling underneath. I left the station and drove home, or what was left of it. The house was cordoned off with police tape, and the sight of it stopped me cold. The structure was barely standing, the roof had caved in, and smoke still lingered in the air. It was a surreal sight, like something out of a nightmare. And yet, this was my doing. This destruction, this tragedy, it was what I had orchestrated. As I stood there, staring at the ruins, a flood of memories hit me. The laughter, the arguments, the moments we had shared in that house. It all felt distant, like another life. The house had been a symbol of the future I thought we were building, and now it was reduced to ashes. Along with Ashley. I couldn't stay there long. I left before anyone could ask me more questions or offer me more sympathy. My head was spinning, and my chest felt tight. I thought I would feel victorious, like I had finally gotten justice for what Ashley had done to me. But standing there, looking at the wreckage, I just felt empty. In the days that followed, I tried to go back to my normal routine. I told myself that I needed to focus on work, that keeping busy would help me move on. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the gnawing guilt that had taken root inside me. People at work were kind at first. They offered their condolences, telling me how sorry they were for my loss. Dan, my best friend and business partner, was especially supportive. He had known Ashley well, and he couldn't believe what had happened. I hated lying to him. Every time I looked him in the eye, I felt like a fraud. He had no idea what I had done, and that made it even worse. "You're a strong guy, Ryan," Dan told me one day over lunch. "You'll get through this. It's just gonna take some time." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'll be all right," I said, though I didn't believe it. At night, the dreams started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, images of fire and Ashley's face flashing in my mind. In my dreams, she wasn't the woman who had betrayed me. She wasn't the cold, distant person who had torn our marriage apart. She was the Ashley I had fallen in love with, the one who smiled at me with those bright eyes and made me feel like the luckiest man in the world. And then, just as quickly, she would disappear into the flames. I started drinking more, just a couple of drinks to help me sleep at first, but soon it became a nightly ritual. Anything to drown out the guilt. But no matter how much I drank, the nightmares kept coming. A few weeks after the fire, I got an unexpected call. It was Rosie. "Ryan? I just heard about Ashley." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft, full of concern. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." Hearing her voice brought everything back. Rosie, the one person who had shown me kindness when I was broken, when I didn't deserve it. I had lied to her, hidden everything. Now she was reaching out again. I'm okay," I replied, though my voice cracked under the weight of the lie. "It's been tough, but I'm managing. Can I stop by? I'd really like to see you." I hesitated. The thought of facing Rosie, of sitting across from her knowing what I had done, made my chest tighten. But there was something comforting about her, something that made me feel normal. Maybe I needed that, even if it was just a brief escape from the guilt gnawing at me. "Yeah, sure. Come by," I said quietly. 2 days later, Rosie stood at my door. Her eyes softened as she looked me over. She could tell, even before I said a word, that something was deeply wrong. "You don't look good, Ryan," she said, stepping inside. "Sit down. Tell me what's really going on." I wanted to. God, I wanted to pour it all out. The guilt, the nightmares, the fact that I had been part of Ashley's death. I had lived in this twisted reality for so long, keeping it all in. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "It's everything," I said instead, sinking into the couch. "It's harder than I thought. I thought I'd feel relieved, but I don't. I feel trapped." Rosie didn't push. She sat next to me, listening quietly. Her presence was like a balm to the storm raging inside me. For a moment, I felt the urge to confess, to unload the weight of my sins. She was offering me a lifeline. I could tell her everything and maybe find some way to start over. But I couldn't. I couldn't drag her into the darkness I had created. "Grief is complicated," Rosie said after a long silence. "It doesn't always look the way we expect it to. But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, Ryan." Her kindness only deepened the pit inside me. I didn't deserve her sympathy. I didn't deserve anyone's. Yet, there she was, offering it freely. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Rosie. I appreciate that." She stayed for a while, talking with me about nothing in particular, avoiding the subject of the fire, of Ashley. It was a strange comfort, being able to pretend for a little while that things were normal, that I wasn't drowning in guilt. But when she left, the weight came crashing back. I had the chance to tell her the truth. I had the chance to come clean, to find some shred of redemption. But I had let it slip away. I wasn't ready to face what I had done. Maybe I never would be. As the weeks dragged on, the police investigation into the fire continued. At first, I wasn't worried. The mechanic had assured me that everything would look like an accident, and for a while, it seemed like that was exactly what the police believed. But then, one day, I got a call from Detective Lewis. "Mr. Walker, we've uncovered some new information in the investigation," he said. "We'd like you to come down to the station to discuss it." My heart dropped. What had they found? Did they know? "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be there as soon as I can." When I arrived at the station, Detective Lewis was waiting for me. He led me into a small room and sat down across from me. "We've been looking into the cause of the fire," he began, "and at first, we believed it was an electrical issue. But after further investigation, we found traces of accelerants in the wreckage, something that suggests the fire may not have been accidental." I felt my stomach twist. Accelerants. That could only mean one thing. The chemicals the mechanic had used to start the fire. Had they left something behind? "We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Walker," Detective Lewis said quickly, probably noticing the panic on my face. "But we need to ask if you have any idea how those substances could have ended up in the house." I shook my head, doing my best to look confused. "I have no idea," I said. "I wasn't home when it happened. Ashley handled most of the things in the kitchen. Maybe she was using something and it got out of hand?" Detective Lewis nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. "It's possible," he said. "We're still looking into it. We'll keep you updated." As I left the station, my mind was racing. They were getting closer. They had found the evidence. And if they kept digging, it was only a matter of time before they uncovered the truth. The next few weeks were a blur. Every time my phone rang, I felt a surge of panic, convinced that the police had finally figured it out. I could barely focus on work, barely function. My life had become a nightmare, and the worst part was, I had done this to myself. The fire had been my idea. The revenge I thought would make me feel better had only made things worse. Instead of closure, I was left with guilt, fear, and the constant dread of getting caught. I had ruined everything. One night, after tossing and turning in bed for hours, I finally broke down. I grabbed my phone and opened the encrypted messaging app, the one I had used to contact the mechanic. I typed out a message, my fingers shaking. "Did you leave anything behind?" I asked. A few minutes later, a response came through. "No, everything was handled as planned. If the police are asking questions, it is just routine. Stay calm." That was the response I got from the mechanic. Cold and to the point, as always. But it did little to ease my mind. The doubt was already planted, and I could not shake it. What if they missed something? What if the police kept digging and found something that could not be explained away? I stared at my phone, feeling the weight of what I had done pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I had hired someone to burn down my own house, to kill my own wife, and now it was starting to unravel. The initial thrill of revenge was gone, replaced by constant fear and guilt. I was a wreck. The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. Every time I walked into my office, I felt like everyone was watching me, like they knew. Dan kept checking on me, asking if I needed more time off. I knew I was falling apart, but I couldn't let anyone in. The one person I had trusted, Rosie, was still in the dark about what really happened. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. A couple of weeks later, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. I got a call from the police station again. Only this time it wasn't Detective Lewis. It was a different officer, someone I hadn't spoken to before. "Mr. Walker, we need you to come down to the station. We have something we'd like to discuss with you." My heart raced. What could it be now? Did they finally figure it out? Was this the moment where it all came crashing down? When I arrived at the station, they led me to a small interview room. Detective Lewis walked in, followed by another officer. The air felt tense, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "We've concluded the investigation," Detective Lewis began, his tone serious. "The fire was caused by accelerants, as we suspected, but we have found new evidence that suggests there was a break-in before the fire started." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. A break-in? This wasn't part of the plan. "We found traces of fingerprints in the house that don't belong to you or your wife," the detective continued. "We believe that someone may have entered the home, started the fire, and fled before it spread. Do you have any enemies, Mr. Walker? Anyone who might want to hurt you or your wife?" I sat there, stunned. They weren't suspecting me. They thought someone else had done it. I shook my head slowly, trying to keep my composure. "No, I don't know anyone who would want to do something like that," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Ashley and I had been having some problems, but I never thought something like this would happen." The detective nodded, jotting down a few notes. "We'll continue looking into it, but for now, we have no suspects. If you think of anything, please let us know." I left the station feeling a strange mix of relief and confusion. They were looking for someone else. They thought a break-in had caused the fire, not me. But that didn't make any sense. There hadn't been a break-in. The mechanic had said everything went as planned. So, where were these fingerprints coming from? The more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. If the police found fingerprints, whose were they? Could it have been someone connected to the mechanic? Was there more to this than I knew? I tried to push the thoughts aside, but the paranoia began to creep in. I started second-guessing everything. Every time I heard a noise outside my apartment, I'd freeze, wondering if someone was coming for me. Every phone call from an unknown number made my heart race. I began to feel like I was being watched, like someone was following me. I couldn't sleep. The nightmares were getting worse. In them, Ashley would appear, her face twisted in pain, her body consumed by flames. She'd scream at me, calling me a murderer, telling me I'd never escape what I had done. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, the guilt suffocating me. I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. One night, after yet another sleepless night, I decided I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to tell someone the truth, even if it was just one person. I picked up the phone and called Rosie. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Ryan? What's going on? You sound off." "I need to see you," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something I need to tell you. I can't keep this inside anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Rosie's voice softened. "Okay, come over. We'll talk." When I arrived at Rosie's place, she could tell right away that something was seriously wrong. She invited me in, her eyes full of concern, and sat me down on the couch. "Ryan, what is it? What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I tried to find the right words. I did something terrible. I don't know if I can live with it anymore." Rosie looked at me, her expression serious but kind. "Tell me, Ryan. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." And so, I told her everything. I told her about Ashley's affair, about how I had hired the mechanic to take care of it, about the fire. I told her about the guilt, the fear, the nightmares. By the time I was done, I was shaking, my voice barely above a whisper. Rosie sat in stunned silence for a moment, absorbing everything I had just told her. Then, she reached out and placed a hand on mine. "Ryan, why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked softly. "Why did you carry this alone?" "I couldn't," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't want to drag you into it. I didn't want you to know what I had become." Rosie shook her head, her eyes filled with compassion. "I wish you had come to me before it got this far. But what's done is done. You can't change it now. The only thing you can do is decide what to do next." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "What do I do, Rosie? How do I live with this?" She didn't have an answer. She just held my hand, her presence comforting in a way that words couldn't be. I moved to a small town where no one knew me, changed my name, found a job that had nothing to do with my old life, and tried to start fresh. But no matter how far I ran, the guilt followed. It clung to me like a shadow, a constant reminder of what I had done. I kept my past to myself. No friends, no attachments. I kept my head down and lived day by day, hoping time would dull the edges of my mistakes. Sometimes, I thought I could forget. But at night, the nightmares came. Ashley's face, twisted in pain, consumed by flames. Her voice, calling me a murderer. I knew I'd never outrun it. No matter how many new lives I tried to build, my past was always with me. I got my revenge, but it didn't bring the peace I wanted. Instead of freedom, I found myself trapped in the prison I created. In the end, revenge didn't free me. It became my punishment. And maybe that's what I truly deserved. What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel, Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.